Okay, so the idea is just to analyze a little bit the liquidity trap and in the economic background. Okay, so to do this, we will start analyzing the money market. Okay, here we have the money market in the first graph. So first of all, we have the money supply, which is just, of course, fixed by the central bank, okay? And then we have the money demand levels for different levels of output, okay? Y0, Y1, and Y2, okay? Nominal interest rate here. And in the second graph, we can see that the output level Y0 is smaller than Y1 and Y1 is smaller than output level Y2, okay? Therefore, here we have the respective money demand levels for each level of output. Nice. So now, note of course that here we are assuming the zero lower bound. That is, that the nominal interest rate cannot be smaller than zero, and this is quite reasonable to assume, given that, of course, the central banks today do not decrease this nominal interest rate below zero, because, of course, otherwise all people would save their money in their houses and not in the bank, and this would have the decay of the modern financial system. So we are assuming this zero lower bound, okay? So now from the equilibrium points of the money market here, okay, these red points, we are going to transfer these points to the second graph, okay, with the nominal interest rate and output in the axis. So this point for output 2 level, okay, we transfer it here. So output 2 level, okay, we have this point, yeah, this point, and for 1 we have this point, and for 0, given this lower boundary at 0, okay, we have this in y0, okay, so we have this curve here for LM for the level of price 0, okay, and here we have in the third graph different kind of price levels, okay. We see that P2 is the lowest one, then 0, and then 1, okay. So here we are in the middle one, okay, in LM for P0. And then we have the IS curve, which is downward sloping, that is coming from the goods market equilibrium, okay. Nice. So now let's we want to construct this AD curve, okay. So let's assume different kind of price levels. What happens if we increase the price level from P0 to P1? Well, note this is the function for the money demand, okay. So putting price in the other side, note that if we have an increase in the price, the money demand will increase for the given output level, okay. So for example, for the output level Y2, the money demand would just shift upwards, okay, and the same for all level of outputs, okay. Therefore, the LM curve would just shift to the left hand side as it does here, okay. We have for price 1, price 0, and price 2. The decrease in price leads to the shift to the right hand side of the LM curve. Nice. So now the equilibrium points in the ISLM graph here, okay, we can transfer these points to construct the AD to the third graph. So for P1 we have this intersection is the equilibrium, so we put it here. For P1 we have this point, okay. For P0 we have this intersection point for P0 level, and for P2 again this is just this curve, the entire curve, okay. So we have again this point as the intersection. So note now that the aggregate demand curve is not the standard one, is not downward sloping for all outputs. Note that here we have a vertical curve in that point, okay, in all those points, okay. So this is because of the assumption of this zero lower bound of the nominal interest rate. Nice. So we see that we see how the aggregate demand looks like. Okay, so now let's move to the fourth and the last graph, okay, which is just independent from all other three. Okay, and now we are going to assume that we have a recession. Okay, let's assume that we have a decrease in the aggregate demand level in our economy. So at first, okay, we have this ASAD point in equilibrium. Okay, so the price level is just that one, and now the AD curve, okay, decreases, shift leftwards because of this recession. Okay, and therefore we have this price level. So we see that the price decreases and output also decreases. Okay, here is the output in natural level and the actual output. So we see that the output gap, that is the output minus the output in natural level, is just negative. So we have, of course, a recession. Okay, so what happens with the aggregate supply curve now? Well, if we go to the labor market, I didn't draw it here, but if we go to the labor market, okay, we see that this recession, of course, the aggregate demand decreases, output decreases, so the employment level will decrease from the full employment level, okay? And at this point, the wages and the resource prices will decrease. And this decrease again will shift the employment level to the full employment level, okay? And this is known as self-correcting mechanism. Note that if this AD curve would not be vertical, if would continue like this, okay, this self-correcting mechanism would just increase again the of course the first of all the here note that the this self-correcting mechanism shifts the AS curve because of this reduction in wages and prices or resource prices will shift the aggregate supply curve to the right. Okay, so we shift it. Now, if the AD aggregate demand curve wouldn't be vertical here, if it would continue as downward sloping, okay, we see that this self-correcting mechanism of the aggregate supply, okay, would lead to an increase in output level again, okay. However, this is not happening now because of the lower bound in the interest rate, in nominal interest rate. So we see that this downward sloping of the aggregate supply because of the recession will not increase output, but it will affect prices again, and prices will even decrease more. Okay, so we have lower prices, but output didn't increase. Okay, so what happens now? Note that here, if we assume that the nominal interest rate here, this is the Taylor rule, of course, the nominal interest rate is zero, then we see that the expected inflation is negatively correlated with the real interest rate. Okay, so a decrease here in prices leads to a decrease in the expected inflation. Okay, let's put it like that, and therefore this will lead, given the negative correlation, this will lead to an increase in the real interest rate. So the real interest rate increases. And of course, if real interest rate increases, then it is more difficult to obtain credits from the bank, and therefore the aggregate demand, okay, will even decrease more, okay, because people will consume less because this increase in real interest rate, okay, because it's more difficult to obtain the credits. So the aggregate demand will again shift to the left, and we will introduce ourselves in a spiral, okay, a deflationary spiral. That is, that prices will continue to decrease and decrease and decrease, but the output will not increase, okay. And this is indeed the problem that we are assessing here, okay. That we have this deflationary effect in a spiral way, okay. Nice. Which is called the liquidity trap, of course. So now, this is the problem that we want to assess. So how we can overcome this problem? Well, Let's see the data. Okay, first of all, well, how we can overcome. Okay, if we go to the European Central Bank, okay, they apply different kind of policies. First of all, they put it this nominal interest rate as zero, and that's why we are assuming this zero lower bound, okay, because it's realistic in this last period, okay. So it's zero or just really close to zero, okay, as we can see here. Now, it's also applying another kind of policies, as for example, quantitative easing, which just is the idea is just to buy assets or buy debt from the banks, okay, in order to somehow um, help the help to increase to help the banks to have a better position in their balanced sheets, so so that to have incentives, okay, again to give credits to the consumers, okay. So this quantitative easing is just buying assets or debt to the banks in order to improve their balance sheets, okay, in order to incentive these credits to the consumers, okay, which would lead of course to an increase in the aggregate demand. There is also another policy, for example, forward guidance, which is just to communicate people of positive expectations, okay, in order to generate positive expectations for the consumers in order to shift again the aggregate demand curve to the right, okay. So again, we are close to zero in our nominal interest rate, okay. So this will lead to and this might introduce ourselves to the liquidity trap, as we have seen in our graphs, okay. And to cancel out this liquidity trap effect of the deflationary effect, okay, the central bank applies these other policies as the quantitative easing or the forward guidance policy, for example, okay. So we have seen, okay, that indeed, of course, if you decrease your nominal interest rate, it's expansionary policy, so you are just incentive. Is an incentive for consumption and an increase in aggregate demand. Okay, so we see the idea is just to increase the inflation level because we were in a really low inflation levels. So to increase this inflation level to the 2% because that is the target of the central bank, okay, nowadays. So they decrease the nominal interest rate. However, okay, note it is true that it increases the in these years the inflation increases. However, um, it doesn't increase so much, maybe, given all the expansionary policies that the central bank is applying. Note that is decreasing the nominal interest rate, is applying the quantitative easing, is applying the forward guidance policies, and apart from that, many countries are applying really expansionary fiscal policy packages. Okay, so the inflation, well, maybe it should increase more than it increases, okay, and this might be because of this liquidity trap problem. Okay, here we see that inflation increases, but now let's go to the third graph. This is in the core inflation, okay, the structural one, the core inflation, okay. This is what really matters, okay. So we see that the core inflation do not increase in these last years, okay. It is true that the overall one, yes, but the core one, okay, the structural one is not increasing, and this might be because of this liquidity trap. However, as I said, we are like canceling out this liquidity trap effect in inflation with this quantitative easing or forward guidance or huge expansionary fiscal policy packages. Okay, so this is the idea. But however, this is the idea of liquidity trap, which might be really interesting given our nowadays, given now, our economy nowadays. Thanks for watching, of course.